Hi everyone, welcome to Conversion Conversations. This is Cameron, and today I have a very special guest who's actually, I think, been on the channel once before. We've got Scott Landis from Vectorsigma, who recently top forward at the Gencon Energon Invitational qualifiers. How's it going, Scott?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. Excited to talk to you. Now, I guess I've got a list of questions I want to run through.
Sure.
My first one is I know you guys are doing your dissection of Gen Con. It seems like you're going to be doing some deck techs for all the decks that you and the patrons ran at Gen Con that, qualified or top aided or anything. You ran, if I remember correctly, at the preliminaries. You ran General Optimus, Blaster. Was there one other deck that you ran during the event?
No, I only played in two of the prelims. I didn't play in the the afternoon ones. I only played in the two quote like morning ones because I qualified in the first one on Friday, and then I
Yep.
was sorry, on Thursday, and then I played Blaster on Friday to try to see. Vince had queued with it the night before, so I wanted to see how good it really was, and that was like just to have fun and try to help him um, see what the weaknesses might have been, so we could get it ready for Saturday.
Yep. And how was that? In terms compared to Origins, right? We were both at both events. At me as a player, I had a preference towards the Origins format where the tournament was stretched out over more days, but it was only one tournament a day for the first 2 days. I liked that. For you and your TCG experience, was the double stacking of tournaments? Is that kind of the way things are normally done?
No, I think the one a day is probably more similar to the way that I've done things in the past, but I've never played in these types of events. So I guess Pastimes does these types of events for like Magic, also on these convention weekends where there's like different ways you qualify for something special later in the weekend. So I think this is the norm for what they do at larger conventions. I mean, usually I'm used to like when I used to travel for larger events, it was just like you went for the event itself, and there was not necessarily like a qualification. There was always like a day one and a day two, and if you did well on day one, you qualified for day two. But there was also always like side events and things like that to do. But this wasn't like a whole like okay, day one has nothing to do with day two, other than X number of people qualify, etc. So I think it was more just an issue of timing because they had to run like some magic stuff on Sunday, so um, that's why we were like 2 o'clock on Saturday. But it wasn't a big deal to me. I understand why they did it. I was just glad that there was like multiple days that you could play and multiple events you could play in. Although I can understand for the people that it was a little more, I guess, jam packed to go from one event to another if they didn't qualify right away.
Yeah, it was definitely a bit of an endurance test for me. I qualified Friday morning, so I played Thursday, dropped when I saw like the math couldn't work out for me to qualify. Played Thursday evening, and then qualified Friday morning. So I was glad I didn't have to do Friday afternoon. I'm sure the guys that ran all four events like that that was an endurance test on their part.
Yeah, you certainly saw the attendance go down as it went on,
Yeah.
which I'm not surprised about. But I thought but the attendance overall was pretty strong.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think I'd be curious to see what the final numbers end up being in terms of unique players. I don't know if they ever released that for Origins, but I have a feeling that it was more unique players at Gen Con than at Origins.
I would imagine so because the events themselves were just larger. And then I heard things like there was like 55 players for Turbo on Saturday or
Oh, that's
Saturday
awesome.
morning.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah,
awesome.
there's a lot of new players being introduced as well.
And in terms of your, I think last time we talked, we skimmed a little bit in your TCG history. I try to do some research online. Your name is actually surprisingly common, so I'm assuming you didn't die in Iraq. That wasn't you.
No,
But I
no.
do believe the version of you that exists is the one that played Star Wars Destiny and World of Warcraft. Are there any others I'm missing? Oh, Magic.
And Magic, yeah.
Yeah.
Those are the three big ones. I'm trying to think if there's anything else like I would even be. Those are the three big ones. Like I played a little bit of like some of the Decipher games back in the day, but they don't matter all that much. Like Lord of the Rings and the original Star Wars. for Star Wars Destiny. I used to write for Wizards way back in the day, also on their Star Wars game. They actually had like a dice-based Star Wars game, right around when Attack of the Clones came out, so like early 2000s, I want to say. So I played that, but that game never got real big. But yeah, my big ones are Magic, World of Warcraft, Star Wars Destiny, and then this.
And how did, I guess I'm curious about your trajectory. Have you always been, did it take you some time to get to the mentality you have now about trading card games, being deep into the competitive side, or was that something that pulled you in right away, even back when Magic was getting, and I assume, I mean, I don't want to presume on when you got into Magic, but I think I read you were around like Arabian Nights?
Yeah, Antiquities. So the second set is when I first started playing. I was actually able to buy unlimited packs at my local store, and I bought. I remember buying a box of Antiquities, and I remember opening a pack of Arabian Nights for like when it was like $30 or something like that to like just get a pack at a convention.
And at that time, I mean, like from what I've, and I'm not as familiar with Magic. What I heard is, right,
Sure.
Richard Garfield didn't envision the competitive scene the way it exists now when he first started the game. When you got into it, did the competitive scene, obviously, of Magic didn't exist as it does today, but was it kind of on the same level that Transformers was starting out, or what was around you when you started playing?
So I can remember the first tournament I ever went to. I didn't even understand the rules. Somebody told me it was supposed to be 100 cards and two of every card, and that wasn't even true. So like even the 60 card, four of every card
Was it like
way that
firmly established?
it was, but like I didn't even know it because I was so young. I was only like 16 at the time.
Hmm.
I remember a tournament in New Jersey, and apparently, so Drew Nolosco, the brand manager for Transformers, he and I actually go way back to that time because he used to work for a company in New York that was running Magic events back then. So that's how he and I realized at PAX last year that we've known each other for close to 25 years. Like, not friends or anything like that, just peripherally knew each other and crossed paths often.
Oh, that's
So,
funny. A small world.
yeah. So, I mean, Magic always supported, like, there being tournaments and things like that. But really, it was actually, it was kind of like the New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia scene. They used to have these $1,000 tournaments, and that eventually blossomed into what is the Pro Tour. I mean, it was similar to Transformers in the sense that like they had a grassroots part of the game. These like the equivalent of pastimes now back in the day before it was even like before people were taking a chance on it. Like it wasn't as big as it is now. But so once the company started to see that there was a need for this, that's where the Pro Tour and all that kind of stuff, the genesis of it came from. So it's similar to Transformers in that way, where they wanted to see the grassroots organization pull up itself before they decided to go all in and actually support it from an organized play perspective. So
Right,
even though it
as a
was
company,
25 years,
mitigate some risk on their end by seeing what the community turnout would be first.
yeah. So I mean, I would say that is definitely a similar trajectory. Although the players that Magic was pulling even back then were astronomical compared to us. But I mean, got to start somewhere. So
Right, right. Yeah, and that's I think that's what I think Scott Van Essen was telling me. He was telling me a little bit about the history of Magic at Gen Con and how like the first sets like they all sold out just because Wizards didn't like there was no market research at the time for them to know how big that was gonna be. So then what made you transition from I guess Magic to was it World of Warcraft was next?
yeah, competitively, yeah, is when I switched over to World of Warcraft. So to be honest with you, like, so I probably played in, I think I played in 5 or 7 pro tours. I qualified for U.S. nationals for Magic multiple times.
Hmm.
But to be honest with you, like, I always want to play a game at the highest competitive level that I can, and to play Magic at that level even now, it's just too time consuming. It's too difficult.
It
Um,
has to be like a career aspect. Like you have to put that equivalent amount of time in.
Yeah, I was basically like one of the Pro Tour qualifier grinders, like when I was in my 20s, like I would travel like every weekend from city to city trying to qualify for the Pro Tour, where there was like 150 players playing for one slot. And like I I was a pretty good grinder, but like that life, like you almost have to stay on top of it to be competitive, and that just wasn't possible given like a full work schedule and
Hmm.
a life and things like that. So I just never thought I was going to be good enough, because I remember. So what actually I'll never forget the day. It was Magic States. I'm not even sure that they even do like state championships anymore, but it was Magic State Championships in whatever year it was, and I went to the one. It wasn't very far. It was like not even far from where I live now, outside the Philadelphia area. And I did so poorly, and my friend's like, "Oh, we're playing this World of Warcraft game over in in Conshohocken, Pennsylvania, not far from where I was." I went there and I'm like, "Yeah, you should come over and try it." So I went over there, tried it, won this pre-release thing, whatever it was, and basically never looked back the entire run of WoW. So that's where that all started from. And WoW, I don't want to say that like you needed less time or effort. It was just I think I understood the game a little bit better. So I just gravitated more towards that for that entire run that game had.
Yep. And then once that was over, was there a break, or was it on to Destiny once WoW kind of had once WoW ended?
So once WoW ended, and became Hearthstone, I wasn't really playing. I dabbled a little bit into online mobile games, like in terms of like card games, and I still am into like gotcha mobile games, like Final Fantasy combat style role playing games. So I did that for a bit, and then when Star Wars Destiny came out, I want to say it was like 3 years ago. I tried it at Gen Con. I actually went just to like to Gen Con just to try new games and like just hang out with friends and things like that. And I tried Destiny, and I was like, oh, I'm not gonna like this dice game because it's too random and things like that. And then, so I got into that for the first, I guess it was like the first year and a half that the game existed. And then I don't want to say I played it. I think I was starting to lose interest in it even before Transformers came out. But when I learned about Transformers and the way the combat system worked and all that, and then it was being supported by Wizards. So Transformers was always like my second favorite IP next to Star Wars. But I really just didn't like the direction that Destiny was going. I really am not a huge fan of the company that runs it and the organized play that they have, and like their internal testing and things like that. So even though I played it at a pretty competitive level, like I top eighted the first U.S. Nationals and things like that, it was it was definitely when Transformers came out, it was easy for me to transition into something else that I knew was going to keep my interest from an IP perspective, and definitely keep my interest from a company making it perspective. And I guess I just kind of got lucky that the area where I live became a hotbed for it,
Yeah.
so I always had something to do with it. So
Yeah, so then that I guess that kind of segues into my next question, which was going to be, like I know, so we stayed together at Gen Con, part of the high end Patreon experience, which I do credit to. I think being able to boot camp like that, I think was what allowed me to qualify. But one of the things we talked about even before we got to Gen Con was like you guys were telling me about your past Gen Con experiences. And I was really, it was my first Gen Con. I was blown away by the size and the scale of it. So you had been like Gen Con wasn't unfamiliar territory for you, even if you hadn't been there previously for competitive stuff.
no, so WoW used to have the equivalent. Those of you that um, those of you that play Magic, like the equivalent of Grand Prix or whatever they're called now, not a Pro Tour level, but whatever the level right before that, below that is. So WoW every year had that level of event at Gen Con. So I pretty much throughout the entire 2000s had gone like every year.
Oh, gotcha.
Um, but what you have to understand is Gen Con was, so I actually went the first time I ever went to Gen Con. It was still in Geneva, Wisconsin, which is what it's named for. Um, Back when it was like TSR running it, so that was probably like I don't even know, whatever the last year it was. Like I remember Palmer and I drove from like home till like Wisconsin, which is way longer than Indianapolis. I don't recommend this at all. I guess I was still playing Magic at the time then, and then basically when the first year moved to Indianapolis until in the 2000s, I had been going like every year for a while, but it grew to massive proportions in the like I want to say like in the last 5 to 7 years, it's really gotten much bigger. And in talking to people in the industry, I know they say that Stranger Things is like a big reason why like D&D has taken off again. But I think like the internet culture, the cosplay culture, the like the living dungeon that they host,
Yeah.
it's not just card games anymore. Like it has just grown to such a level. I mean, I assume you got the email. I know I got it right away because I'm on like the press listing for Gen Con, but this was the largest Gen Con I think they've had. So it's over 70,000 players,
Yep.
70,000 unique players, something like that. And it was just insane. Like how they sold out of badges like completely for Saturday and Sunday and things like that. So this was definitely the biggest it's ever been. Although I know 3 or 4 years ago, whenever that 25th anniversary or 50th anniversary, whatever it was also pretty big. But this was pretty insane. It's just grown to a level of honestly ridiculousness. But like it is, it's just too many people. You can't move. Like the badge lines are like days long. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and kind of assume you guys did your prep, your competition prep article. I think Dan wrote that.
Yeah.
I kind of assume you guys at some point will do your Gen Con postmortem, not just on the tournament level, but like, hey, maybe if you're going to go to Will Call, make sure you do that Wednesday night before, or things like the way the ticket system worked at Gen Con differently than it did at Origins. I know that's something that took me by surprise. I was eventually able to get things refunded, but I had to buy like extra tickets, even though I had registered online, because I assumed that my online registration was all I needed, like it was at Origins.
Yeah, there's some kind of like so Gen Con and Origins are run by different companies. I think
Yep.
Gen Con is its own organization at this point, and I think Origins is run by the same company that runs Gamma, which is the like the industry convention that they have, where like you can only go to if you're like actually in the industry. Like I guess I can probably go to it if I'm in the industry now, but like I know that like the companies themselves go to it. So I think the same company that runs Origins runs Gamma, and they're basically I don't want to the way they quote take their cut is different than it is with Gen Con. I think that's basically the issue. Like for Gen Con, you're paying Gen Con, and then Gen Con pays the company holding the event, as opposed to I think Origins it's the opposite way, where like Pastimes in this situation I think pays Origins after the fact, after they say how many people they had, whereas Gen Con it's like all up front.
Yep.
And I talked about it on Tech Talk this week, where I was kind of like, in the year 2019, the way that Gen Con does things just seems really antiquated to me.
Yeah, I think they're
So
slowly transitioning over, because like once I qualified Friday morning, or I guess by the time that was over, Friday afternoon. But
yeah,
then I had like 3 or 4 hours to kind of walk around Gen Con with my friend Max and stuff. And like it seemed like certain events, depending on how they were set up, certain events they had a badge scan where it was all digital. So hopefully next year Gen Con can roll that out to even more opportunities, and things will be updated a little bit. Um, but yeah, it was a very unique experience from my perspective. I mean, it won't stay unique. I'm going back next year because I think the competitive scene has its hooks in me. Um, but yeah, it was really really cool. In terms of, I guess, talking a little bit about the patron and Patreon experience. So you guys have been, I know, Vectorsigma is very dedicated to the competitive side of the scene. Um, the As patrons, or if someone signs up as a patron, there's different tiers and there's different levels of coaching and back and forth discussion about deck lists and deck building and play strategies that can be done. But then for Gen Con specifically, you guys open up a tier which was, look, we got this house. You pay and you get the part of the Airbnb, and then it's basically, I think it was right the month before Gen Con was like just a deep dive as the team itself. You guys were getting set up for the meta. The patrons at that level were side by side, going through those decks and that building experience and everything. How, in your terms of looking back on what you guys did right and what you guys could learn further from, I guess, first in terms of gauging the success of that, I think out of the team and the patrons, um, there were nine. Was it nine people were top 32? Out of the top 32 were Vectorsigma affiliated.
Yeah.
So in terms of consistency, I think that's a resounding success. Um, was there anything that after Gen Con, and maybe you already kind of talked about it in your tech talk, now that you've
Yep.
seen in Origins, you've seen here was the meta established, here is the meta as it's like new and untouched. Is there anything different you're thinking about doing in terms of going up to the Energon Invitational, which sounds like it'll be more like the Gen Con experience in terms of meta?
Um, so I think the difference is so the main difference that you have to understand is that the metagame that was created at Gen Con, which I don't really, it's really even hard to say that even one was established. So I think
Yeah,
one
it
of the
really was
advantages,
a hodgepodge, wasn't it?
yeah, I think one of the advantages that people have, through the Patreon, like you've mentioned, and things like that, is just there's enough of us internally, and I guess I'll use the word externally for the patrons, but internally for the team itself, to basically bounce so many ideas off each other and play so many pocketed games of the new set that we can establish our own metagame and what we think other people are probably going to notice out of the new sets and what they think is going to be powerful. But if you look back at what happened at Gen Con, I really believe that most of the decks that did well were they didn't take 100% advantage of Siege. They basically just updated old lists. I would say probably 80 to 85% of people, even the ones that qualified for the top 32, were basically just playing slight modifications of Rise of the Combiner decks with new battle cards usually, and sometimes not even new characters. And then the other, you know, let's just say that was 50%. Then I would say
Yeah.
like 30 to 35% were probably playing, okay, it's this old strategy, but I'm going to update the characters because this character just makes things more powerful. And that's where, like, I think, like, your
Yeah, the
card
General
stacks would lie. And I was
Optimus.
like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's
So,
I
and
mean, he's
yeah,
a new character, but he's really just pushing the general like the math forward a little bit. He's not bringing something totally new to the table ability-wise.
right. And then, like, what's remaining is basically, like, some of your slightly different General Optimus lists, or your Shockwave lists, or your decks that were focused around new characters, but a lot of them were either just updated strategies of old characters, or just literally no difference in characters, just slightly updated battle decks. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's only so much time that smaller pockets of communities have to actually establish this. And I think the other thing is there was so little time between it, and we talked about this a little, and if those that heard both, I apologize. But the main thing for me was not that the set came out a month before the event. It was that Origins was so close to Gen Con that we had to be inundated in the Rise of the Combiners meta still going on before we could fully transition to a Siege meta, because the Origins event was still just as important, if not more important, than the Gen Con event to us personally, because we felt correctly that the player base was going to increase exponentially once we got to Gen Con, as we did, from Origins. So our best chance to qualify for the Energon Invitational would have been at Origins. I mean, luckily we qualified at both, but that's neither here nor there. Just the process was easier. We
Mm-hmm.
felt like, to update everything we did at Origins. Not to mention that Origins introduced sideboarding and all those things. So I guess the bottom line is the metagame is easier to establish when you have a team of people, and people that are all rowing in the same directions, that we can say, hey, we have these, I don't know, what do we have, like 12 to 15 deck options of varying levels of, hey, we didn't change anything, except for a few battle cards, to all the way to the other side, where, hey, we're really focusing on these new characters. This is where we think they fall against each other in a month of testing. You know, if the metagame is established the way we think it is, you should go with this strategy based on what we think. But the problem is, I don't know. I don't know that everybody. Obviously, no, everybody else doesn't have that same opportunity. So like that can lead to a lot of like inbred testing and a lot of like assumptions like, oh, this deck can't ever beat this deck. Well, we don't even know that everybody even knows what that deck is. So what do we
Right.
care if it can't beat it? So, you know, we tend to overthink where there's an assumption that other people are going to come to certain conclusions, but like that may not always happen. So I would say going into the Energon Invitational, the one advantage that is going to be there is that there isn't anything major right before Siege 2 drops. So I know personally, like, I'm going to start proxying and starting to play games with Siege 2 cards as soon as they're released.
Yeah.
I'm not out there like, I don't have Hot Rod proxies right now or like Triptychon proxies
Right,
right
but if
now.
you
But like,
see one that like you see, oh, that's an interesting mechanic, I think I can fit that in somewhere. That's something to start testing with.
right. So like a month from now or a month and a half, 2 months from now, because I can't believe we're like 4 months away at this point for by the end of it. But like, so like 2 months from now, most of the set should be out there. So like a month and a half, 2 months, we will start to actually, print color proxies and play with them against established strategies and understand what the situation is. But without having any major events right before that, I think that it'll be a little more smoother process to identify some strategies that I know we've already not only already missed, because I still think that there's a huge metagame to be discovered through the qualification local store
Yeah, and
metagames to determine.
I was going to ask you
So
about that. Are you and the team, are you guys going to still be going out to local qualifiers in your area to kind of keep a thumb on the pulse of where the rest of the community at large is at?
yeah, we have patrons that aren't qualified yet, so we feel like it's our responsibility to continue to be on like the finger on that pulse, as you mentioned.
Hmm.
Because I wouldn't feel right if I was giving somebody outdated advice as to what to do.
Absolutely.
Um, but again, I would say the only way to really understand that, like if it's not in our own local area, would be like we need to see information from other qualifiers out there and understand what's doing well in them to really start to see what an evolving metagame is within the qualifier invitational, like larger metagame overall. Because like it's definitely going to be a regional thing in terms of how many people show up, what types of players show up, and things like that. But for our local metagame, we're certainly going to go as often as we can. And I guess one of the good things is, I mean, I could literally go every week starting the weekend we're at right now. I didn't go yesterday to one, just because Gencon was last week. But like, basically every week from now until the end of the qualifier season, within a 2-hour driving radius, there is a qualifier. So we could go every week. I just don't know how often we're going to go, but often enough to keep a pulse on things.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I think I just put out a video trying to pull the qualifiers within like 100 miles of Cincinnati, and I was surprised by how many we do have. A lot of them are in Indianapolis, but I guess that'll still be an interesting opportunity to drive and meet some people and stuff. So
Yeah, I
what?
mean,
Oh, go ahead.
it's great for everyone that's local. Like for a lot of for a lot of people, I, I was talking to some patrons and teammates about this. Like, I know it seems like, okay, we're qualified, no big deal. Like, but for a lot of people, that local event is going to be like the make it or break it for almost the game for them in 2019.
Yeah.
So these are still very important to a lot of people. So we want to be able to help as many people as possible.
Yep. And yeah, as mentioned before, if people are trying to kind of get some advice and maybe get some perspective beyond them and their close personal friends who they play with, like I'm a patron member, it's been a great help so far. In terms of, I guess, the game looking forward and your personal goals with the game, like you mentioned, you want to be at the top end competitively. The next kind of personal goals for you would be the Energon Invitational. We don't know the format or anything yet. We know the grand prize at the end of it is the money, but then also creating a character card. Do you have anyone in mind right now, or is it you want to win it first and then you'll start thinking about what you do with the reward?
If I was to win, I would want to make a Megatron that doesn't flip, doesn't transform, and then when he dies on the reverse side becomes Galvatron. That's what I would
Gotcha.
want to do.
Like almost a revenge mechanic where on Megatron it says revenge, move it from the KO back and flip it to the other side or something.
Yep, and then it would be like, some ridiculous offensive stats and like low defense and
Yeah,
like
and his
low,
ability
like,
is one shot any
yeah,
Starscream on the field.
right, like something like that. Yes. I don't know exactly how it would work, but it could probably cost like something ridiculous like 14 or 15 stars because it would be so like
Yeah.
game breaking when you like you get a character back and things like that. But that's what I'm thinking
Yeah.
anyway. It would be like the movie version because I know like in the version I think Galvatron and Megatron aren't even the same character at all and things like that. It's different.
No,
So
they're not. Well, for you, you mentioned like Transformers is your second favorite IP to Star Wars. Was it like the original cartoon was your time, but was the movie kind of the big impression you have from the franchise, or was there anything afterwards that you paid attention to?
no, it's the movie 100% for me, and it still is to this day. I've actually so it was interesting. Like I used to be on like I'll just date myself, which I obviously have been doing since moment one. Different news groups and things like that. Like I used to follow like what some of the other history was, some of the stuff that people had. Some of the
Are you talking about like the Usenet groups?
yeah, like the continuity that people had discovered that was always there that like I wasn't keenly aware of as a kid. Like
Where like
you
Beast
know,
Wars was attached to the original cartoon
yeah,
and stuff.
yeah, because that was after my time, like the second season or whatever. Like when they're in the arc and like they're real small and like they're their descendants and all that kind of stuff. Like that was like
Yeah.
way after my time. So like after the TCG came out, I got way more into this. The comics are so Vince lent me the first 8 of those hardback things that he has.
Oh,
So like I
like the
read them.
first 8 volumes of the original,
Yeah,
like the IDW or the Marvel comics.
yeah. The IDW. I had the Marvel comics, kids, so I still
Gotcha.
actually have those. I was actually just telling my wife the other day. Unfortunately, what was cool back in the day is that the comic store near me used to actually get in the UK versions, the
Oh,
magazine
nice.
size ones.
Yeah.
So like I would go every 2 weeks and pick up them as well, but unfortunately I don't have those anymore because they didn't fit in the comic boxes. So when I moved, like
Oh, you
when I when my
tossed.
yeah,
Oh, I bet
so
you those might have been worth a decent little chunk to collectors now.
oh yeah, because those stories are unique. Like because a lot of them weren't just adaptations of the US comics. Like
Yep.
because they came out weekly, it was like two of the four were just in it, like whatever the comic was that month, and then 2 of the 4 were unique. So they had enough time to do a lot of really cool stories.
Hmm.
I know like Simon Furman was the main writer, who's now like one of the main writers for IDW. So like I know the direction they took a lot of that stuff was definitely considered to be like the canon and the best way of doing it. I know like things like the records and things like that came from those stories.
Hmm.
So I've gone back and read a lot of the IDW stuff after the fact, like mostly through Vince. But next time there's one of those bundles available, I'm definitely gonna buy that. I'm not a big like reading comics online person, but the amount of money that the graphic novels cost is just too astronomical. So I'm just gonna have to suck it up and read on a tablet,
Oh yeah,
which I'm
and I
fine.
think it's like
So
the next time they do a bundle, it'll be like $15 or something to get
yeah,
all of them.
yeah.
Something
So
ridiculous.
yeah, so I'll definitely do that next time. But I've just learned so much like through Chris Feely's YouTube channel where he goes over the basics of certain characters. I
Oh
just
yeah, I
never
love
even knew.
those episodes.
I never knew there was this much out there. I never knew about all the Japanese stuff. I never knew about like, obviously I never watched like the quote kitty versions after the fact, like the
Car
Gorilla Meets
robots
the
from the
Eye.
2000s
Yeah,
and yeah, yeah.
yeah. Pretty much anything that was past Generation 1 was like a black hole to me. But I've gone back and learned a lot of the interesting stuff that's happened in between there. So, I definitely have a lot of respect for the people that know all this stuff.
So
But you know,
so
do my best.
as a player and a fan of the IP, I know there was some initial discussion, and I thought it was really interesting design decision that like Magic has its own story, its own thing going on. a very, like, to me, intense and almost sometimes intimidating canon that they have in their storyline. And Transformers, they didn't really need to do a storyline for the card game because they can just say it's the characters from all the shows and cartoons and comics you love. Would there be any additional pull to the game for you if there was some storyline involved, or for you as a competitive player, was that kind of a separate part of the TCGs you played in the past? You didn't really pay attention to that part as much.
So I certainly never paid attention to it at Magic. I started playing the MMO after the card game came out. So I would say that definitely happened where the card game pulled me into the MMO. Sorry for the dogs.
Oh, no problem.
Uh, Here, I mean, I don't think I could get into it any more than I already am. But I think if they were to do some of the stuff that at least I'm connected to, it would definitely have more meaning for me in terms of, like, if they had a
if they ever did a movie, a movie set,
things like that. I just don't know. Like, it's interesting to me that Siege is going to be, part of the card game, part of the Netflix show, part of, like, the toy line and things like that. So it's interesting to me that, like, I get to be in the card game at the same time that it's, like, being formed in all types of Transformers media. So that is interesting to me, that I get to see it all develop at once. But, they have so many different directions they could go that I guess it doesn't really matter to me one way or the other.
Right, you're already hooked.
Oh, yeah. The one thing I will say is I actually started playing when I was in that the gacha game phase I was speaking about earlier. That's actually where I started to get back into Transformers, because there was actually Transformers Rising came out, which was a mobile game that came out from, I think it was even South Korea, where most of the art from the first two sets actually comes from.
Oh, and yeah, I think we had a version of it here called Legends.
Yeah, technically, there was Legends and there was Rising.
Yep.
Legends came out first. It was terrible. It was just like every week there was just like a new, most powerful card.
And there Rising, wasn't really a game as far as I understood in Legends.
It was basically just like, it was like a button masher. Like, it wasn't very fun.
Yeah.
But then Rising came out, and to me it was like a true gacha game where, like, you had to make teams, and, like, you had to form, like, there's equipment you could get for the characters, and, like, that was a great game to me. So I played that for about a year, and that's where I kind of got back into a lot of this. And from there, like, it was almost maybe 6 months off, and then the card game came out, so it was great. So I had been getting back into it, just not as heavily as some people, because I just, like, I stopped collecting comics for a while, so I really just wasn't into all that stuff.
Gotcha. That's interesting, like the way kind of things can cycle. I think, as far as all my questions, like that was kind of the general gist of the talk, was just give players the opportunity to get to know you a little better now that you top 4, and talk to you a little bit. Is there anything, I guess, you want to address to the audience or let anyone know? Anything you want to get off your chest, or any announcements you want to make before we call this one done?
I mean, I'm pretty approachable. You can feel free to hit me up on Facebook if you ever want to chat about stuff. That's the easiest place you can reach me. I know I don't want to, I hope I don't come across as, like, intimidating or anything like that. I think I'm pretty approachable. So, as best as possible, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns. I know a lot of people in the Transformers TCG are new to the competitive gaming in general. So
that's definitely true.
Yeah, so any advice I can give on that, please ask. Also, I have a weekly podcast in Tech Talk that Vince and I do. Please hit up the Vectorsigma .info Facebook group. Like, we go live once a week. We try to anyway, to record live. Please ask us any questions you might have, if they're slanted in this way or if they're slanted toward the game in general. It's just easier for us to address the questions that people might have to a broader audience, because chances are other people have the same questions and aren't asking them. So,
and you generally do Tech Talk Thursday nights?
Yeah, we try to do it Thursdays at 7:30, but if, like, for Gen Con, that became our so we would move it. But, like, we always try to put the post out there asking for live people to join live. So
Yeah, and it's always a
yeah.
good conversation. I know I've missed the last couple just due to work and stuff, but I've been enjoying the tech talks. And then you guys also have vectorsigma.info, the website, where I think you guys are still posting up articles weekly almost, maybe taking a little break just after Gen Con to recover. And then the YouTube webpage, where right now you guys you're two deck techs into a total of, I don't know what you guys are planning on putting out in terms of what you ran at Gen Con, but I'm sure there are more to come.
Yeah, one thing I do want to mention is there might be a perception that some of the content is gated through the Patreon. It's really not, honestly. What's quote gated, I think, is just extra access to us and extra like personalized attention. I feel like the Transformers trading card game, from a technical perspective, like teaching people how to like attack in the right order and things like that, it's just more. It's more based on a one-on-one experience. So I think that's what people have access to through that. But like, we're not only releasing articles to patrons and things like that. There might be stuff that's released early, but we're not gating any content. Like our goal overall I would say since 2019, when we expanded the team roster to become more possible, is to try to release daily Transformers TCG competitive content, whether it's through YouTube, through the website, or other means, to at least interact with the community in some way, shape, or form, whether it's actual content or just like a post asking for slightly more than just hi, like on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
So that we will continue to do that. That won't change, except for like you said, like oh, we just got back from Gen Con this week, or oh, hey, we're inundated, testing for the Energon Invitational, because we just can't give out that level of competitive information to everybody. So we do have a responsibility to some different parts of the community, but I don't like. I'm planning on doing articles that are just as in depth as a conversation I would have with a patron, out there for the world. So don't think that our information is gated or anything like that. Really, just access to us is what's gated.
Yeah, definitely. That's been right. I know from personal experience, I've been able to kind of schedule, like, say, half an hour every couple of weeks and just pick your brain on, okay, here's what I'm seeing locally. Here's how I've tried to deal with it. What other ideas are there, or what am I doing wrong? That's been the brain picking has been, for me, the most valuable part of the experience.
Yeah, my mantra has been since I actually played at PAX Unplugged and played locally as well, because again we have a pretty good scene here. Is I still believe that the game itself is um, the, it's more about the player than it is about like the deck, to an extent. Like once you have the basics down and once you have like if we're playing pretty equal power level deck lists, I think there is a big steep hill once you understand how to deck build. But once you hit that point, to me it transitions 100% into play skill.
Mm-hmm.
So there are just certain things that like can't be. If I was to show you a deck list and write an article about why this deck is good, it's not going to be the same as being able to teach you how to play it and understand like the very, very many different matchups that are out there, because the game is so new that most players just aren't playing established deck lists. So your decisions and things like that have to change on the fly. I don't think that's something that can just be taught through an article. So it's just difficult. So
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, all right. Thanks again, Scott. This has been a
no
great
problem.
conversation.
Yeah,
Anyone
you
who's
too.
been listening in, as mentioned before, check out Vector Sigma through all their different avenues. Reach out to Scott, reach out to the other team members, and I hope to hear from you all soon. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Cameron.